Alrighty guys, so we're back with episode 4 of the Plant Podcast. We're doing it in a little bit of a different scene today. We're actually up in the Star Casino and we're doing it here with our we have our plant background. We actually had some birds here before that we really want to get involved, but they've just left us, so we're going to make them a little bit of a treat next time, so they hang around.
Set a trap.
Yeah, we'll set a trap. Yeah, to keep hanging around. So today guys, it's going to be me and Maddie just talking about basically just having a conversation really just around some cool things that I know you guys have thought about, especially if you're in the health conscious space and you're looking at things that can really improve the way that you function day to day, the way that you get nutrients in. We're looking at some really cool phytonutrients and some interesting facts about those phytonutrients that we didn't really know, but Matt has some good insight on that as well, and some things that I've used in my smoothies for years, thinking that I was getting particular types of vitamins and minerals, but really I was getting the things that weren't actually giving me what I wanted. So we're going to try and shed some light on that, and then maybe just look at a couple of key, I guess, superfoods that have been, thrown around throughout the industry for years and years. Things like cacao and spirulina, chlorella, astaxanthin. Just looking at some things in those foods that we can utilize to the best of our ability, and maybe some things that you thought were in there that maybe aren't giving you quite what you thought you were getting. So maybe just to kick things off, let's maybe just take a quick squiz at spirulina. So it's an algae, it's an algae. It comes from the ocean.
Blue-green algae.
Blue-green algae.
And I only remember that because when I was young, grew up in Mackay, we used to have that where we used to go wakeboarding and everyone goes skiing in the Youngla Dam. Every once in a while they used to shut it down because of the blue-green algae.
Yeah,
and you can't go swimming in there in case you get this blue-green algae in you and you get really sick. But that's what spirulina is.
Yeah, right. Well, that actually is funny. It's funny you bring that up because I've got a friend of mine, Zeke Grove.
Yeah.
We went swimming in a lake in Madison, and there was an algae bloom there, and he got really crook from that. So we were all swimming in this lake, and we were telling the locals, because the whole local community of Madison, they get around the CrossFit Games. So when we're there, we're competing, and they're just like, "Oh, we have a swimming event this year." It's like, "Oh, where are you swimming?" It's like, "Oh, we're swimming in that Wandana Lake or that lake over there." It's like, "You're not swimming in there, are you?" And we're just like, "Yeah, that's where we're swimming." It's like, "No one swims in there." And it's like, "Why?" There's like algae bloom. It's like so bad for you.
Yeah.
And so we were all pretty okay, but a couple of people got really crook out of that.
Yeah.
So it's
so you can get like really sick from it. And then what's interesting about a lot of the algae is when you get these algal blooms when the water quality is terrible.
Yeah.
Like, so the more toxic it is and when everything's starting to die and that sort of stuff, the algae just takes over. And then in the supplement world, we always talk about these algae also being very good for detox.
Yep.
Because they have this ability to accumulate and absorb toxins. So it's really interesting that if you get the algae from the wrong place, then it's going to be pretty toxic. You know?
So I guess in the same respect to like fish, having an algae in good quality water is kind of crucial. We don't want it filled with, I guess you could probably get buildups of like mercury, probably. You could probably get buildups of other...
runoff and that.
Runoff.
You get a lot of problems with runoff. Like, so a lot of the pesticides, fertilizers, all the petrochemicals and that sort of stuff. So, like if you get it out of the lakes near a farming community, or so Mackay where I grew up, there was a lot of cane farm and that sort of stuff. So it goes through and kind of wrecks the ecosystem a little bit. The algae thrives and grows, it then absorbs all the toxins, then it dies off, fertilizes the ground and restores the waterway. So it's really important. And so you'll find, and the rest of the time they do like cities or whatever, but you'll see that's why when products like spirulina over the years, they'll talk about the Hawaiian spirulina or the pristine waters or grown. So what's really important when you're looking at those algae and trying to find a good supplier of is find out where it's actually grown, where they're sourcing their stuff from, and make sure the place is clean.
Yeah.
Also check and ask them, like, what is the heavy metal content of it? Like, what is your pesticide residue?
Yeah.
How much toxins has it already absorbed?
Yeah.
Because you kind of want to know that before you go and supplement mega doses of it to detox.
Yeah.
Because you could be putting the stuff in.
Well, I did look at this a little while ago, and I saw that they had a lot of farms. Yeah. So they were separated from contamination of the pesticide runoff, and having it in areas where there's tons of traffic, of boat traffic, and you're getting all of the the petrol and the diesel and all the oil and stuff going through it. So they're building these algae ponds, and they're kind of producing it, I guess not artificially, but having their own ponds that are segregated so they can make the most pristine, provide the right water, provide the right sunlight. But you need like perfect conditions. I've heard that's like perfect conditions are required to make it right and to make it good and quality.
To make it clean, to make it thrive and grow and be clean. Because then it's like, if you look at it as like a toxic sponge, you kind of want it to be a clean sponge before you consume it, so that way it can absorb your toxins. Otherwise it's already full, you know. So that's very important. You'll find astaxanthin, which is like those little krilly kind of plankton-y sort of things, they're very same, so they'll absorb a lot of those toxins as well. So it's very important to get those things as clean as possible. Then we've got like cracked chlorella or chlorella, and they're pretty much the same again. It's just an algae source. All of these things are really good sources of nutrients, lots of magnesium, lots of protein, other nutrients as well. We're still learning a lot about nutrients, because that's where we got confused with the B12. Because I always used to talk about spirulina being a great source of B12. Cobalamin is the chemical word for B12. So you get cyanocobalamin, methocobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, all these different cobalamins. And they're tiny doses in our body. Like, I'm talking, like the recommended daily intake, we're looking at a microgram, a couple of micrograms is all we need. Tiniest doses. But it's also a very tiny molecule, and for years that no one could actually understand exactly what it was. So now they've realised that all these different forms of cobalamin exist, and the one that was in spirulina was not the one our body can use. And the problem was with it is that the body thinks it is, it resembles it, looks like it, but it kind of can't be converted, so therefore you can absorb it, and but you can't metabolize it, which means you can't use it. So ultimately it competes with B12 because it actually takes the space of B12 without doing the B12 functions. So far, from what we know so far, because we could come back later and find out that oh no, there's another form of B12 our body does use, and that was one in spirulina. But I don't know, at this point in time they thought it was a good source, and now they think it's a terrible source. Because it can contribute to B12 deficiency. Well, and it's the same. It's almost the same as they'll fortify foods with folic acid. So 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 10, they argue a lot in the science community. 1 in 4 to 1 in 10 people have a problem converting folic acid, which is a synthetic form of folate, or a degraded, oxidized, a bad form of folate that's not familiar, that our body can't use. That's what they fortify our foods with. And it doesn't exist in our food, but it's the most stable form. So this is it kind of gets a bit weird, because there's all these different forms of folate that are actually in our food, but they're bound to like tannins, and they're bound to proteins, and they're bound to that so they don't wash away when it rains and stuff like that, so it stays in the plant. But all those different forms of folate that are in our food, the body can metabolize them. When you boil that food, then when you boil the folate, making that folate water soluble and extracting it out, you're converting it into folic acid. So, but in the early days, they didn't have the ability to measure the folate in the food. The only way they could do is they talked about the folic acid yield. They didn't realise that the folate in the food was different. And so anyway, they had all these mountains of data talking about folic acid and how amazing folic acid is for the body, and how stable folic acid is, and blah, blah, blah. And then all this fortification, and then they realised there's 1 in 4 to 1 in 10 people can't actually convert that folic acid. Now the problem with that is, if you're fortifying foods with this synthetic form of folic acid, then it gets absorbed, but your body can't convert it. And so then when you actually eat the good foods that have the real good form of folate in it, they can't get past the folic acid that's stuck. So it actually overwhelms, or it just gums up the system. So if you have a look at B12 and folate alone, they need to be converted into a very special forms of B12, and they need to be converted into special forms of folate. I'm not just saying special because it's like methylene tetrahydrous, stupid words. So basically the form of folate and form of B12 that we're getting in a lot of these foods, and the fortified foods, could actually block the conversion pathways. Now it's folate and B12 that joins up with iron to make blood.
Yeah, right.
And so, for example, if people coming through going, I'm on this plant-based diet and I seem to be anemic all the time, and I've been taking my big iron supplements, enough to constipate me a big black poops or whatever, but I still can't build blood. And then they're like, oh, and by the way, they've also measured my blood and they said my B12 and folate is good. But they're measuring folic acid and cobalamin. So the testing, they can't tell if your B12 and folate in your blood is good.
Right.
But you could have totally gummed up the system with dodgy folic acid and dodgy B12, then your iron's got nothing to join with.
Right.
And this is the other crazy thing. If you give someone a mega, I said with B12, you only need tiny doses.
Yeah.
You give someone a big dose, you can actually mask a folate deficiency.
Right.
And then the vice versa. So
right.
these things, and those three compounds, if you consider B12 and folate, they build the myelin sheath that does the nerve coatings on your body. They build your blood. They do your neurotransmitters for your brain, the brain chemistry. They're like involved in so many of these functions. Your detoxification pathways, all your methylation, how you make bile, all of this sort of stuff.
Energy production?
Energy production.
Energy production?
Nerve function. I have one job. I don't give a fuck what your jobs are.
I think we'll leave that in there. That's
no,
great.
It's got to be good. Yeah, we got to go.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's super interesting, and I think for me when I was going more plant-based, I was looking for foods that would have it in there. So we can get B12 or the right forms of B12 from nature, but they usually come out of the dirt, in the water, and all these things have been so either purified or washed and all these things, so we're not really getting it in that form unless we're either using a cyanocobalamin supplement, which is, I don't know, typically I think in the plant-based community that's the most typical one we would go for.
Most
common one to go for. So how could we make sure that when we're having that cyanocobalamin in our, like, as a supplement or a sublingual supplement, what types of measures could we put in place to make sure they're actually getting it into the body to go down the right pathway? Like, what types of things would we be trying to avoid, I guess, or maybe the other ones that we're trying to avoid? We want to make sure that we're building blood. We want to make sure that we're getting it right to the energy systems. I want to be like a high-performing athlete in triathlon, or if I want to be a gymnast, or I want to be this, I just want to make sure that I'm getting it in the right way and making sure it does its job.
When we talk about it all the time, and this is probably a spoiler to most of our podcasts, will be we need variety, and nature provides a big variety, and a whole diverse forms of all these nutrients is actually what we need. And definitely not going to basically be able to say that we know out of nature what they did right and what they did wrong, because I've never seen anything in the human body or nature that's not done for a reason. So it'd be a bit arrogant to think that we know, but because we might discover, that's what I was saying, even with spirulina, at this point in time we think it's the wrong type, but we might discover later that it's not.
Helps with something,
but with B12 you've got this, it's kind of split, so it goes down these pathways where you can go down the adenosyl cobalamin pathway or you can go down methylcobalamin pathway, and they're the two main functional forms. The methylcobalamin pathway can't come backwards. So this is an important point, because a lot of people think the methyl one's the best. So they go and use
that's
the
what
methyl.
I had heard, and then I heard you can recycle it a bit.
Yeah, but you can't. So if you do the methyl, if you're deficient in the hydroxy and the adenosocobalamin, you can't take the methyl back. So a lot of people think the methylcobalamin's the best, but it's not. It's the best for methylcobalamin. So what the ideal combination is, if you're going to do the methyl, then you want to have it mixed with hydroxy or adenosocobalamin. Otherwise, you go the hydroxy, and it can go down the two different pathways. Cyanocobalamin is just another form that then gets converted into the hydroxy. And go. Cyanocobalamin's the cheap nasty one we've been using for the most. It's like cyanide cobalt molecule.
Great.
Which is it. I mean, like I said, such miniature doses. The funny thing is I tell you what's crazy is for the vegan community and that sort of stuff, if you don't get enough B12, then all of a sudden you're not a vegan. You're a cannibal. Because what actually happens is you actually start shedding your gut lining, and you actually digest your villi. So the
Right.
little villi on your gut lining,
Yeah.
your body will digest that to liberate the B12 out of it.
Wow.
For your microbes
Wow.
will do it, because
They'll do
without it, they can't live.
Mutiny.
Yeah, microbial mutiny. They're sitting there going, this guy's not feeding us enough. We're going to eat his gut lining
Yep.
to get the B12, and then it'll liberate more B12 for you out of your gut lining.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
crazy, hey?
interesting.
Because if without B12, if you don't have blood, you don't have nerve function, you don't need a gut.
And
You know?
is there any particular signs that, like symptoms that we could get from not getting enough B12?
Yep.
Something that we would find?
Usually fatigue, nerve function, neuralgia, so like nerve pain, sciaticas, that sort of stuff, nervousness, and inability to switch off. It controls a lot of these catechol-methyltransferase enzymes in our brain that they detoxify the brain chemistry after they've been used.
Right.
So it means after you've released your chemicals that make you worry, it's supposed to help clear it away.
Yeah.
Otherwise you can't let go. So you
Yeah.
get very stressed, and that would be B12. At the same time, you could be anemic and fatigued. So because it gets that type of anemia where you've got neuralgia, nerve pain, and lack of blood, it's very stressful, because your stress signals in your body are picking up going, is this person bleeding to death? Have they been bitten
Yeah.
and now bleeding to death? They've got pain, they're lacking blood.
Yeah.
Like the stress survival nervous system goes, hey, this could be a big deal.
Yeah.
So you get this really weird fatigue, but you run on nervous energy. You get this
Yeah.
worry and this nervous anxiety.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's-
So B12 is an interesting one like that, but you'll often find crappy bloods. But because B12 folate also involved in detoxification of the brain chemistry, they also involved in the detoxification of estrogens and testosterones as well.
Yep.
So you get a lot of hormonal and neurotransmitter disorders, a lot of insomnia. So you get so tired you can't sleep.
Yeah.
And then you can't sit still. Like you
Right.
get that restless legs, you get that restlessness.
Wow.
Every time you try to move, you feel the fan hit your legs, and it's annoying. It's like I have to move again.
Right.
So it's like funny feelings like that. Restless legs is a classic feature. Hair loss. So many.
Yeah, crazy.
But very vague and general,
yeah.
because that's what happens when you got no nerves, no blood,
Yeah.
and shit detox.
Yeah.
So stuff's going to go pear-shaped
Yeah.
everywhere, and it's so crucial for survival that
Yeah.
the body will start breaking down your own resources to replenish it if you don't eat it. And in saying all that, we still only need a couple of micrograms a day.
Yep.
For perspective, a teaspoon of powder or something, like a teaspoon of sugar is like 5,000 milligrams.
Yeah, right.
So like a quarter of that teaspoon is still like 1,000 milligrams.
Yeah.
So we're looking at
Very-
1/4,000th of a teaspoon, or 1/5,000th of a teaspoon is the
Yeah.
dose. So it's a speck.
Yeah, it's a spec.
Yeah, and that's why you don't need mega doses. either.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I guess tacking on from that, something else that typically comes up in a plant-based diet that, especially if you're wanting to be an athlete, something that
Yeah.
really helps is supplementing with creatine.
Yeah.
So, so I think having creatine, if you're 100% plant-based and you want to, build some extra muscle, you want to even just function, they've even shown some studies on how it can help your brain function properly. But yeah,
Yeah.
creatine monohydrate.
Creatine's brilliant. So I'm a big fan of creatine, and one of the most well-studied nutrients of all. Probably the most
Yeah, the most,
well-studied.
yeah.
I think that and coffee.
Yeah.
I think, and then maybe sugar.
Yeah.
That's probably where we're at. So creatine is amazing, but like we're saying, it was discovered because of the guys that invented it, that discovered it, were like mad keen steak fiends.
Yeah.
They used to live on steak.
Yep.
And they wanted to work out what it was in steak that made them play such good NFL and everything like that. So all your Rick Crichters and your Eric Rolson and all those guys over in the States, the old bro bodybuilders and NFL players, they just created so much data on this creatine. But it is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And seriously, it's massive amounts in meat and none in the plants.
Yeah.
And so the thing is it's made from these amino acids that you get out of your plants.
Yep.
But it's a bit awkward because like you're burning fuel.
Yeah.
And so like to use these amino acids to build this storage sort of fuel while we're kind of running, it's one of the benefits of the creatine supplementation, that you can just go straight in. And what creatine will do is increases the amount of ATP you generate per cell. It's your energy currency per cell.
Yeah.
Plus it's water soluble.
Yeah.
When you load up on creatine inside your cells, it creates hydration. Like for example, when you go through a loading phase of creatine, where typically they'll do like 5 grams 2 or 3 times a day, like take about 20 grams a day for a while.
Yep.
Normally only need about 2.5 grams a day
Yep.
is enough to keep it up. But when they do these loading phases, you'll find that most people put on about 5 kilos of water weight like within a week or two.
I think that's me right now.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have any for probably, I'd say 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And then this week I've done maybe 6.5 Ks of swimming. I've done over 40 Ks of running. I've done a little bit of cycling. I've done a few CrossFit sessions. So it was the highest volume week that I've done. But at the start of the week, I was 83.5 kilos, wanting to get under 80 for a competition coming up. And I just got on the scales yesterday and I was 86 kilos.
Yeah.
But it's the first week I've had some creatine back in my diet.
Yeah, it does it, hey. Oh, I'll tell you something interesting in creatine. It can't cross your blood-brain barrier, okay? So when you eat it, it's got to be broken down into those precursors to be absorbed into your brain to reform as creatine. Creatine holds fluid in your brain, very important to prevent concussion, prevent against dementia, and keeps your brain. It's one of the best brain fuels of all. But what's interesting about it is, when it's broken down to those raw materials, the way it's put back together is through a process known as methylation, which is dependent on folate and B12. So if you've not eaten the meat, if you're deficient in the folate and B12, then you can build creatine or absorb creatine into your muscle. You can't get it into your brain. It's got to be methylated to build creatine into your brain.
Interesting.
You get into like a vicious cycle where you get foggy head.
Yeah. So I guess another one, probably one of our last ones before we keep this one short and sharp for you guys. Another particular thing, and you guys are going to love this because it's one of the. It's not the most traded, I think, commodity we have, but it's right up there. It's very close. But I want to talk a little bit about cacao.
Oh yeah.
So cacao, the antioxidant value that it has, maybe some things that actually help with hormones and testosterone and things like that. I know that it's just been used across the board, like that in ginger for helping hormone balance. But basically, antioxidant value. It's chocolate,
nootropic, the
tastes
theobromine.
Good.
So it's got these weird forms of caffeines that makes like a slow release from a theobromine to a theophylline, and it's like a very nice easy up and easy down form of nootropic effect, which is really good. It's a very good vasodilator, which is why some people get headaches. People get the chocolate headaches. That's how good it is as a vasodilator with the vasoactive amines in it and make the blood vessels pump into your head. Excellent antioxidant. Dodgy as hell cartel. I told you, apparently it's worse than the cocaine cartel.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's like this commodity, this chocolate commodity. So,
and where the best is and get the best. And,
and like who secures what supplies and who misses out and stuff like that. Everything's full on. But so there's so much information into it as well. But excellent antioxidant, very good vasodilator, very good nootropic. Really good pre-workout.
I was going to say pre-workout. It sounds perfect for pre-workout.
So it is.
Maybe putting like a creatine of sorts pre-training if it's good for if that's cell currency. So creatine and cacao together would be like kind of pretty cool mixture.
It's a weird one with creatine because there's some really good studies that show pre-workout very good for hydration, stops dehydration, very good performance. I mean, it's creatine monohydrate, it's 100% absorption, and it all gets utilised somewhere, one way or the other. There's a weird school of thought that it's still best used post-workout. Because after you've depleted your stores, then you can replenish it.
Sure.
I think it makes no difference. I think most time we're loading, we just top it up.
You just have it any time throughout the day, doesn't matter, but just have a little bit every day.
I'll tell you another interesting thing that we should look for more in the future, because it's something people don't talk a great deal about. And this might be a link between the algae that could be good for us as well. And maybe the microbiome stuff. But the other thing that's in meat that's not in plants is that meat cell wall. So what actually makes up the meat structures and the cells are these particular types of phosphatidic acids, these phosphatidylcholine, these phosphatidic compounds. And there's not much of that in the plant kingdom because of the way the cell walls are. So other than creatine, things like B12 and iron, different forms of iron and that sort of stuff. One big difference that's in meat that's not in plants that no one talks about is phosphatidic acid.
Right.
And if you're looking at what's really well researched as well in the sports community, as an anabolic and ergogenic aid, phosphatidic acid is one of the most well researched things around.
Right.
It's not in no one uses it. So it's not a thing. It's weird.
Could we do something similar to creatine and take maybe the salts or the amino acids from plant material to create phosphatidic acid? Can we do that? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, well, there's some, like, so there's certain like things like lecithins and algae, and there are like a lot of phosphatidyl compounds in our diet that you can get from plant, but they're not commonly consumed. Now things like lecithin and that might be a really good source, but then most of the lecithin used in baking and processing comes from soy, and people were like, say it's evil.
Sure.
Processing aid. I think it's actually really good stuff.
Yeah.
I like it. I really like it. It's got lecithin's amazing.
Is it good for brain function?
So lecithin actually works like bile.
Yep.
Like if you have it, it emulsifies the fats. If anyone's got no gallbladder, or if you can't absorb any fatty foods, or you get nauseous after taking oily supplements, the lecithin just cuts straight through that.
Yep.
It's a very good source of phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylserine, phosphatidyl'inositol. That builds all your myelin sheath for your brain. It stimulates acetylcholine release, dopamine release. And I buy bags of the bloody stuff for like $2 at Woolies, and we throw it in. I mean, my boys have smoothies, and I put it in the smoothies to help emulsify the oils into the protein. But also knowing that they're going to get these other benefits.
That's cool.
You can get sunflower lecithin. Might be better than soy lecithin. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of it's just lecithin. But that's I think that's a good one. I reckon you could. I mean, you could throw that into your proteins, no problem at all, as a good source of this thing. I think it's excellent.
It's great. Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, well, we've just covered a few things there, so hopefully you guys got a little bit of information out of that. We hope you liked the backdrop today, and honestly, we'll be back next week with probably in our regular place. But yeah, hopefully you guys got some cool information, and I guess we'll catch you next time.
Yep.
Thanks, Matt.